Hello and welcome back to Toronto Till I Die, the Toronto FC fan show. I'm Mike Newell, and this is something a little bit different. This is our new offshoot show previewing TFC's upcoming opponents each week. We'll be bringing on fellow bloggers, podcast hosts, journalists, friends from other clubs to provide perspectives on our opponents. We're working on the title, but I think we're going to call this Who Are Ya? You tell us if you like that title. So much to get into in so little time, so say hello to my TTID co-host, Jeffrey P. Nesker. Jeff, buddy, how you doing?
I don't know. Let's find out. Roll tape.
It's the Toronto Till I Die pre-recorded match preview.
This Saturday, TFC take on NYCFC at Yankee Stadium at 7 p.m. TFC entered this game unbeaten in 3, riding the vibe of a home opener win against Charlotte, while NYCFC remain winless after a heartbreaking 90-plus minute loss to Portland in their home opener. So with all that, what does the game hold for your Reds? To help answer those questions is Andrew Leigh, senior writer and editor at Hudson River Blue. Andrew, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
So, Andrew, obviously, it's been a rough start for NYCFC. Some of the things that are happening for the club are quite familiar to TFC fans in terms of the start. How did NYCFC's offseason build go? Because we kind of had a similar build last season. There was a lot of optimism going into the 2023 season, then the kind of wheels fell off. But it seems like NYCFC had a really sort of positive offseason. So how did that sort of build go?
I think pretty well in terms of the players that came in seem high potential, seem like young players that could develop into the sort of regular starters that sort of carry NYCFC back to the playoffs and back to contention. Problem that they faced is that players like Jovan Mijatovic is an 18-year-old that they signed from Red Star Belgrade as a striker who's very well thought of in Europe and is coming over here with a lot of expectation. Could be the club record signing. They didn't officially say that when they announced him, but for all intents and purposes, he's probably the club record transfer fee that they've paid, which is like 8.6 million guaranteed, I think. So he's like a very high potential signing, but he's only played sparingly as a sub in the first 3 games, has yet to score. They've only scored 1 goal on the season. So like the kind of players that they've sort of put a lot of their sort of eggs in the basket of, Mijatovic, the striker. They also signed a 19-year-old winger from Racing Club in Argentina, Agustino Heda, who's only played, I think, 1 match as a sub or maybe 2 matches as a sub of the 3. So these are guys that they expect to have, I think, a big role in 2024, but they've not really had a chance to acclimate yet to MLS and really like sort of hit the ground running. Part of it is just the timing of when they signed during, preseason and had to get work visas, had to get in and actually like get up and comfortable with their teammates, which I think is still ongoing. So, I mean, in terms of the attack, those are 2 guys I think that they expect to be very important this year that have yet to really play. So they're still working with the attackers that they finished 2023 with, which obviously they fell short, didn't get to the 9th seed to make the play-in game and the playoffs and stuff. So I think there was more optimism coming into this season because after the summer window in 2023, they did look better. They were more kind of what you'd expect in terms of a tougher team to beat. They put together a modest winning streak towards the end of the season and looked like they might make the playoffs. So coming in, there was more optimism, especially because of the fact that they'd signed some really promising young players in the winter window so far here. But it's just been falling flat on your face for the first 3 games. I mean, 3 losses, 1 goal scored, just as bad as you could possibly be. Totally collapsed in the second half of their home opener to lose their home opener for the first time in club history this past weekend against Portland. I mean, the Portland winning goal was a once in a lifetime strike by Evander, which is inherently like you can't predict for that kind of thing. But they should not have been in position to lose in that sense either because they had way more chances than Portland in the first half and should have had a multi-goal lead. So it's one of these things where I think they've yet to really have a complete performance. They've yet to really get all their new players that they expect to be important integrated properly, and they're just sort of really slow as you can be out of the gate so far, 3 games in.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny because you're sort of going right into my next question, which was on your game recap of Hudson River Blue, you mentioned that, and I'm paraphrasing here, the growth and potential of the 2024 version of New York City was evident during the first half of the home opener en route to a vibe-shifting multi-goal victory. Instead, the second half at a soggy, gray, cold Yankee Stadium went completely off the rails. Again, sounds familiar to TFC fans, but what would you attribute to sort of that collapse in the second half by NYCFC?
I think they rued too many missed chances in the first half. I mean, they were all over Portland in the first half. Munsaf Bakrar, who's been the striker that they've sort of brought in last summer and has been their starter at the number 9 spot pretty much since July of last season. He this season has had, I think, maybe almost 10 shots on target and has yet to score. He's been in a lot of great positions to score and has yet to actually find the back of the net. And I think the fact that he was unable to convert any of the like 3 really good chances he had in the first 45 minutes, the team, I think, was a little bit tentative coming out in the second half and played more to protect the 1-goal lead. And I think Nick Cushing actually managed to try to protect the 1-goal lead more than to get back out on the more offensive sort of controlling the game approach that they'd had in the first half. So they let Portland get back into the game. They let Portland grow in confidence. And I think it's just, some of it is just tactically they didn't sort of put on players that would have allowed them to go for the second goal more aggressively. They kind of got, I think, a little bit too defensive in the second half. And then some of it is just confidence. I mean, the team has not been able to put together a full, complete performance so far in 3 games played. Like they played real well in Charlotte in the opener, but gave up a goal on a corner kick and basically never were able to find an equalizer, even though they sort of had control of the game after they gave up a goal in the first 10 minutes of that game. St. Louis, they were pretty much like overwhelmed by the home opener of St. Louis City SC and didn't really show up and compete with them in that game. In this game, they think they sort of went into a shell after they took the lead into halftime and came out of halftime not really aggressive the way that they had been in the first 45 minutes. And it seemed like as the second half wore on, they were just sitting back expecting to be equalized, which they did get equalized in the 85th minute. So I think it's just like some of it is confidence, some of it is trying to be too conservative once they've actually done something positive like get a lead. And I think it's just a thing where the team is too it's a very young team. I mean, they had to replace the team that won MLS Cup in 2021 almost entirely. So few players are left from that sort of high point of the team back from 2021. So it's like a wholly rebuilt roster that has yet to really figure out, I think, how to control. I mean, that's what you mentioned Keaton Parks speaking post game. He, I think, explicitly said, we have too many young guys who don't know how to see out a result. So I think that's really what they come down to is it's this very young team that relies on a lot of young talent sort of blossoming that they're waiting for that to happen, and it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, that felt familiar. The Keaton Parks, Nick Cushing sort of War of the Worlds kind of triggered my my TFC 2023 senses. First things first, credit for calling it MLS, not the MLS, because I don't know, that might be like edging into my number 1 pet peeve. It used to be when people say espresso, but now it's when people say the MLS. I got to ask, because what's it like being a fan of a team that's part of City Football Group? I've always wanted to ask somebody, and now that I've got you here on the hot seat, I'm going to ask you: are you automatically a Man City fan?
No, not at all. I have very little interest in Manchester City. I think it's an interesting relationship to have because for me personally, like I follow all the sort of weird mechanics that take place in the City Football Group universe, and I find it very interesting because I think the multi-club model is such a weird thing that now has run rampant across the sport globally, and like they're the sort of forebearers of it. They are the biggest one, and I think it's been a bit of a love-hate relationship for the almost, this is the 10th season of NYCFC playing. There's been, I think, benefits in terms of just some of the talent that's come through NYCFC, especially just like young players that they've unearthed through their scouting network and just like great players that have been the icons of NYCFC, like Tati Castellanos. Tati Castellanos is like their exemplar of like what they want to do when they sign, 18-year-olds and stuff. So it's cool. It's cool to see that in action and be able to follow a player who sort of like breaks out and moves on to like top clubs elsewhere overseas. But then you also do suffer from the sort of feeling of the little stepbrother mindset of like, it's always going to start and end with Manchester City. And even now, like Girona in La Liga, they're like, challenging at the top of the table in La Liga. So of course, like CFG's put more emphasis and thought and focus on them. So it's like one of the things that we've written and we're going to write again this year at Hudson River Blue is like power ranking all the teams that CFG owns in terms of what the like
Melbourne
mothership
City
ship.
FC, man, always the bridesmaid, never the bride, huh?
Right.
I
I
think
think
he's
like
like,
they're yeah. Where do they fit? Like,
Mhm,
well, they bought
mhm.
one in Turkey. Now they own a club in Turkey, or they call it like a strategic partnership. But basically, they
Yeah,
bought a club in Turkey and they own them. And like, so it's like, yeah, like all these different places. And I think even when I was mentioning like this, the young players that they sign, that's really the like sell to the 18-year-olds that you're going to get to come over to NYCFC, especially of like,
yeah,
oh, if you succeed here and are like performing great in MLS and like putting numbers up that draw attention from Europe, we will help you go play for Girona or any of these other teams. So that
Melbourne
also
City
is kind of
FC.
right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I haven't seen it yet, but it
Mhm.
could happen. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I think that's the part that I think is good and bad as a fan in MLS, especially where you're always sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like you see some great young talent break through with NYCFC, but then it's sort
mhm.
of like the clock starts then of like when are they going to get enticed by some move elsewhere, either in
Yeah.
CFG or whatever. So,
You
Yeah.
should
but
pay
that's
more
also
attention
the
to
way
the
that
Canadian Premier League. We've got one franchise of the 8 that's sort of a strategic partnership with a Liga MX kind of consortium. And we've also got Atletico Ottawa, which is very, very interesting. That's a straight purchase by Atletico Madrid. Uh, really interesting stuff. And yeah, it's fascinating, but we're seeing it here sort of at the grassroots level at all. I'll go back on script now. Why do you think?
Oh.
Why does your team suck? Why do you think NYCFC have struggled out of the gate given the higher expectations?
I think, well, I personally think that the expectations are sort of all over the place with them even coming into this year. I think it's like a team that if everything went right, they could theoretically take off and like climb the table. But I think given how young a lot of their players are and given how sort of hard it was last year for them to get wins, put wins together over the course of a season. I mean, for a long time they went a very long time last year without winning multiple games in a row. So it's like I think the reason why they're where they are is because they are still relying on really young, untested guys on a professional level who have yet to put like the kind of seasons together in MLS or even in their other stops before they came to NYCFC to really like develop on the fly and be ready to sort of contribute to a team that competes in MLS. And I don't know for sure that that's going to happen right away. And I think the really hard thing to know is how patient the sort of like leadership, the front office will be, given how they're coming off of the first time that they didn't qualify for the playoffs since 2015 in 2023. They did spend a lot for them in terms of just bringing in high priced sort of young attacking players that they wanted to have sort of help them get back to scoring multiple goals in games and actually winning, especially at home. So
Mhm.
I think the thing that they've yet to really figure out is what combination of attacking players is going to actually get them to score goals, multiple goals. Like this year they've scored one. So even last year, in one of the biggest strengths that NYCFC had for years, from 2015 until pretty much 2022, they were very hard to beat at home. They rarely lost at home, and that faded a lot in 2023. And I think this stretch coming up now with TFC Saturday and then 2 games on the road, but then 6 straight at home after that, this is a sort of make or break stretch for NYCFC. I think in 2024, where they're going to have 7 of their 17 home games before we get
Mhm.
to like May 5th. I think May 5th will be their 7th home game already at that point.
Wow.
So they need to put points on the board like soon if this season's going to get back to being sort of one where you're talking seriously about playoffs or trophies or anything like that. And I think it's really going to be all on Nick Cushing to figure out pretty quickly who he can rely on to be his sort of leaders of the line in the attack and what his right sort of midfield mix is, because I think their midfield has been sort of in flux a little bit because they've got sort of 3 guys that they want to play, but only 2 slots that they can actually fit them into in James
Mhm.
Sands, Keaton Parks, and Andres Perea. And that's been sort of unsettled, I think, so far this year in terms of how they're going to settle that setup in the central midfield. So there's a lot of parts that Nick Cushing has to figure out. And I also think Nick Cushing's under a lot of pressure because of the fact that I think fans are very disillusioned with him, given how bad last season went in terms of just failing to come close really to being a playoff team and how hard it's been so far 3 games into this season.
Yeah. How hot is his seat on a scale of 1 to 10? 11.
So this is the weird one because you talked about City Football Group. He is an entire
Mhm.
product of City Football Group. I mean, he was the Manchester City women's coach, first one they ever had. He was like through their pipeline all the way. So he's very much like
Mhm.
a company guy. He's the company man all the way. And they gave him seemingly a lot of leash in the role, because he started out as Ronnie Dyla's assistant in 2020. He was here through them winning MLS Cup. He was a part of the staff. Dyla left to go coach in Belgium. Cushing became the interim. And I mean, he had success in 2022, but that was also the tail end of the sort of like championship team that they had, that had Tati Castellanos, that had sort of like Maxime Chanot, Alexander Collins, Sean Johnson, like the core guys that helped them be good. So it's like he won, Campeones Cup that year, and they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals again that year. But then last year was just really just a very bad year. I mean, they won one game away from home the whole season. They really just couldn't even get consistent winning streaks together, even when they had a lot of home games. I think with him, it's
did you have a bad year last year? Oh, that's so
I
cute.
mean, honestly, nothing compared to you guys. True. I think the expectations were probably lower for NYCFC, but then I think fans have been used to them becoming more of a second half team and sort of like retooling on the fly and figuring out what they need and then making a push and getting in the playoffs. And that just failed to materialize last year. And I think a lot of people hold that against Cushing because they think, oh, well, the team did sign new players and help address the holes that they had. So why wasn't he able to still get them sort of over that hump into the playoffs?
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, like, is it going to result in him being replaced? I think it would require a really bad start to the season. I mean, 3 losses in a row is very historically not good in MLS, but I think it would have to be real bad for them to pull the plug so early. I think especially because they sort of let him have such a hand in picking the players that they brought in this year, especially. I think he's spoken in press conferences leading up to the season about how he's really excited about the new signings that they made because he was very instrumental in signing them. So I assume his case for staying is, I've barely had time to work with these guys that I just spent like, $15 million to sign. So how can I be judged on that when they haven't started yet. They haven't been here to play yet. So I think fans would like changes to be made sooner rather than later. I'm not convinced that the organization will act super quickly unless it gets really dire really soon.
Fair point. And look, it's an interesting one because again, it's so many parallels to how Toronto FC were at this time last year. Even though
don't scare him.
Look,
three losses is scary enough. Like it's
exactly right. But the same questions about head coach, how are you playing? The players you brought in and signed. Very, very interesting parallels. Let's talk a little bit about Saturday's matchup itself. You're talking about a team coming into Yankee Stadium with a bit of momentum for the first time in a very long time, but also a team that traditionally has kind of been so-so at Yankee Stadium in terms of results. How do you think NYCFC will line up and come out against Toronto FC on Saturday?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm watching is who starts up top for sure, because Moussa Fakrar, as I mentioned, has had a lot of opportunities since coming to NYCFC as the starting striker. He was the guy that they brought in to sort of solve the goal scoring crisis that they faced in the middle of last season. And he's great in terms of like expected goals, all the metrics that are not actually goal scoring goals, like metrics. He excels in those things, but the amount of chances that he's wasted in the first 3 games and the amount of sort of like just opportunities that have fallen apart once the ball's ended up with him, the guy you think is going to be the last person to touch it before it's in the back of the net, and just like has failed to translate so many times. I'm curious if he's actually in the starting lineup. I'm curious how the front sort of line of attack that Nick Cushing tries to roll out there on Saturday will look, considering Toronto's yet to concede. I'm not sure if Sean Johnson will be healthy enough or not, but he's always played well at Yankee Stadium historically if he is healthy enough to be back. So it's like, I think that the mix of players Cushing has tried to use as his sort of front 3 at a 4-3-3, it's changed. I mean, he tried Andres Jason as right winger in the last game in the home opener after he hadn't played at all in the first 2 games. So I think he's still in experimentation mode. And I think I would be expecting to see the new signings actually put right in from the start Saturday night. So Augustino Heda, who's a sort of left winger, speedy, small, diminutive Argentine, who likes to dribble at people, kind of direct attacking wide player. I would expect to see more of him against Toronto than we've seen so far, because he'll have had more time to actually like train with NYCFC and get it into the squad, considering he didn't really join until late in preseason. I would expect to see more of him. I would expect to see more of Jovan Mijatovic, who's their big signing at striker from Red Star Belgrade. I think those are the kind of guys that NYCFC fans especially want to see more of because of how much hype is around them and sort of expectation is around them. And I think this is the sort of moment where Nick Cushing sort of has to figure out if he can unlock those guys quickly, because that might be what makes the difference between him continuing to feel the pressure of all the underperformance and actually improving what they're doing on the field. I think the thing that Toronto is red hot. I think it's a totally different team. I think NYCFC picked up wins late in the season last year against them when Toronto was already sort of, John Herdman wasn't in the role yet, but he'd already sort of taken the job, and it was like that sort of weird intermediary period of purgatory that you guys
we
were in.
remember that game. It's probably it's probably the rock bottom. I mean, the last goal that Ahmed Badika conceded is
Santi sat down
burned into my corneas.
All that stuff. Yeah, that was pretty rough.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad for us. It was really bad.
But I think like that's a very different scenario. So I think it's going to be a wholly different game than what those games look like. So I'm very curious to see how the sort of red hot team faces the very, very fragile NYCFC. I mean, historically, the Yankee Stadium has been, like I was mentioning earlier, like a place that most away teams did not come in expecting to get 3 points. That I think has changed a lot in the last year. And I think that's one of the things that it's a different team. The team doesn't have that air of sort of invincibility. I mean, invincibility is probably a strong word because they did lose games there plenty of times. But the peak NYCFC teams like 2019, 2020, 21, 22, those teams, it felt like they were very confident
like a fortress.
Even if they fell behind, they were going to get the goals they needed to still win. And that has not been the case since 2023 at all. So
perfect.
It's a very interesting matchup coming in.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think,
looking forward to it.
Yeah, and from a Toronto FC perspective, I think there's this sort of, for us, it's kind of like, well, they've started off so well, but yet there's this sort of lingering, can they score enough goals? Can they find a way to goal enough times to win a match? Like, you're kind of defensively solid, but relying on moments of magic from Lorenzo Insigne. At least so far this season. Is there another route to goal, right? So it's funny because, again, even though we're on a good run of form at the moment, some of the concerns that you have kind of are some of the things that we also have here at Toronto FC. Can I just ask? Yeah, exactly. Can I just ask, like, in terms of, in the stadium, in Yankee Stadium, the vibe amongst the fans, something we talked about on Saturday on our show on Monday, just in regards to how are fans sort of reacting to the team now in the stadium. You just went to the home opener. How was that for you?
Oh, it was not pretty by the end. I think by the end, it was up there with one of the worst sort of atmospheres of a home game that they've experienced, I think, in the 10 years of playing at Yankee Stadium. I mean, I was talking to people. I would have probably put the way that they lost that game in the top 3 of their losses at home, sort of historically. One of the top 3, including when Giovinco scored a hat trick in 2016 to bury NYCFC in the
that.
I wasn't going to mention it. It's been on the tip of my tongue.
I was at that game. I was at that game too.
Yeah.
Well, that was the first time they made the playoffs. It was like all this excitement of like, oh, MLS playoffs, here we go, and just
it was pretty
Toronto
fantastic. Yeah,
I mean, it was that was the peak era of Toronto FC too. So I mean, that's how it goes. Giovinco loved playing at Yankee Stadium. Size and man matched perfectly, like size of field and size of man.
Yeah,
so he dominated every time.
Lorenzo Insigne. It's parallels all over the place.
Honestly, like the days of Giovinco versus David Villa had a lot of problems at the end of his tenure in New York just because of his off-field behavior, which is another thing that we don't have to get into on this podcast. But like him and Giovinco playing together, like playing against each other in 2015 was very entertaining kind of stuff at that stadium. But I would say the vibes at the moment are very, very poor. By the end of the game against Portland, there were audible chants of fire the coach, basically, like by X added time when it was given that they were not going to get a win. The fact that it was the first home run that they ever lost also feels very sort of foreboding, just because that was sort of a given from 2015 to 2023 that they would at least not lose the first home game. So I think there's a lot of pressure just on this game coming in just to get a better feeling in the home crowd, especially because I think things will turn against the coach and the team pretty quickly if they fall behind and are struggling the way that they have in the first 3 games on Saturday. So Toronto, from the away team perspective, all the incentive in the world to get an early lead and sort of try to take control of the game, because the mood will not be positive by the time that happens. in
Fair.
Yankee
We
Stadium.
don't score early goals. This is Vibes FC, man. We're going. It's squeaky butt
we're all
time
defending
until the
in vibes.
89th minute, and then Lorenzo's going to do the one move he does, the reverse Robin, and it's all over for you guys. But we'll see.
So, Andrew, just one last question before we let you go today. Obviously, we've talked a lot about NYCFC struggles to start the season, but 3 games don't make a season. So obviously, there's a lot of game to go this season. What are some of the things that might be positives that NYCFC can take into the remainder of the season and maybe give you some optimism for the team going forward?
I would say the spine of the team is pretty solid. Like, I think defensively, they've conceded 2 against Portland late in the game. I think they generally have been pretty good defensively since even last season when they didn't make the playoffs. Ultimately, it wasn't because they conceded tons of goals. It was more a failure to score goals. So the back four that they've run with hasn't really been the core issue of why they've lost the first 3 games. So I think defensively, they're usually pretty good. I think Matt Freese has established himself as the number 1 goalkeeper since Sean Johnson left for Toronto. I think last year there was a bit of a vacuum of who was going to be the number 1 keeper between Freese and Luis Barraza, who started the season as like the regular sort of starter, but Freese basically won the job by like late in the season, and he stayed as the number 1. And he's a big part of their success, I think, late last season and what they hope will be success as the season goes on, because he's actually been very good as their number 1 keeper since Johnson left. I don't think he's as good as Sean Johnson, but he's actually been pretty solid in that role. So I think defensively, they have a pretty good foundation to build from. I think James Sands and Keaton Parks as the sort of base midfielders that they've used the most are pretty solid in terms of they link the game really well. They're really highly accurate passers, and they can connect with their teammates really successfully. They just sort of have to build from that and figure out how to take the sort of baseline solidity that they have at the back and help that translate them to actually scoring goals, which they have still not done. But I think that there are the pieces in place for them to be more solid, continue to not give up a lot of goals. It's just how will they actually get to that next stage of winning the games that they need to win. So I think that the optimism resides in the fact that they do have a decent foundation of players from the sort of back part of their formation. It's just how do they make the right mix happen up the field in front of the opponent's goal, which they have yet to really figure out. So,
all right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, a lot of opportunity for the rest of the season. Andrew, again, thank you so much for taking the time just to give our listeners a little insight into NYCFC ahead of Saturday's match. Obviously, good luck both in the game and obviously going into the remainder of the season.
Thanks. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it should be a good game.
And, we can find you at Hudson River Blue, which is www.hudsonriverblue.com. If I'm correct, another former SB Nation site that is still around. Awesome.
Yeah, we actually
you love to see it. Yeah.
So we just became like reader supported 2 weeks ago. So we went from
congratulations.
SB Nation. Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's a brand new sort of thing where we're now asking people to sort of step up and help us keep the site going. I mean, it's an independently owned and operated, just largely two people doing the labor to get it to continue to be a source for news and coverage of NYCFC. So we cover more than that. We cover New York soccer in general, basically. So it's a cool thing. I mean, we're really excited about the fact that our readers have helped us keep it going, and we hope to continue to do it for as long as we possibly can. So if you're ever interested in learning more about what's going on with NYCFC, we're the place to turn. So please come through.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Okay, thank you for your time, dude. Let's do this again next time we meet, hopefully. And yeah, I'm sure you have dinner.
Will NYCFC have any points between now and May 18th when they play?
Oh, come on, man!
That's the
return
pod.
Down.
That's the return pod.
Yeah,
we're acting all smug now, and then it might be a different tune, man. It might be a different tune.
It can never be as bad as we were last year. So take comfort in that. We're here for you. When that Athletic article comes out, comes out, we're here for you. We've got
It's the Toronto Till I Die pre-recorded match preview.